had a summer so hot, it cooked a river of raw sewage until an entire city was brought to its knees, begging for mercy? Welcome, history pros, to London 1858. The event, they called it the Great Stink. Yes, you heard that right. In the sweltering heat of July and August 1858, the River Thames, which had for centuries been the dumping ground for all of London's waste, decided to, well, fight back. The city's population had exploded, and its medieval sewer system, a messy combination of old pipes and open ditches, couldn't cope. Everything from human waste and industrial effluent to dead animals was festering in the sun. The smell was so overpowering that it reportedly caused people to vomit and flee the city. Even Queen Victoria's pleasure cruise was cut short by the horrifying stench. But this wasn't just a bad smell, it was a public health catastrophe. London had already suffered through devastating cholera outbreaks in the preceding decades, with tens of thousands of deaths. At the time, the prevailing miasma theory incorrectly blamed foul air for spreading disease. So, when the Great Stink hit, panic ensued. The government, whose own Houses of Parliament were right on the riverbank, was finally forced to act. They even tried soaking the curtains in chloride of lime to mask the smell. But you can't perfume a peg, or in this case, a polluted river. The real solution came from a visionary civil engineer, Sir Joseph Bazalgette.
For years, he had been advocating for a modern, comprehensive sewer system. The Great Stink was the political leverage he needed. In a remarkably short 18 days, a bill was passed to fund his ambitious project. Bazalgette's plan was a marvel of Victorian engineering. He designed and oversaw the construction of over 1,100 miles of new street sewers, connecting to 82 miles of massive intercepting sewers. These new sewers, running parallel to the Thames, would divert the waste far east of the city to be released into the estuary on the outgoing tide. The project required 318 million bricks and showcased the innovative use of Portland cement. By the time the core of the project was completed in the mid-1860s, it had a dramatic and immediate impact. While Bazalgette and his contemporaries were operating under the flawed miasma theory, their solution inadvertently addressed the real cause of cholera: contaminated water. By cleaning up the Thames, they all but eradicated the disease in London. Sir Chuckleston, so what's the lesson here? The Great Stink of 1858 shows us that ignoring negative externalities, in this case, quite literally the crap we produce, doesn't make them go away. They just build up until the crisis is so acute and unavoidable that even the most powerful people have to hold their noses and finally invest in a real solution. All right, history pros, gather round. What's the dumbest reason you've ever gotten into a fight? Stole your parking spot? Ate the last slice of pizza? Pfft, amateurs. In 1325, in northern Italy, 2 entire cities went to war over a wooden bucket. Now, the popular legend says Modenese soldiers snuck into the rival city of Bologna and pinched a bucket from a well, causing the honor-bound Bolognese to declare a full-scale war. It's a great story, but the bucket was more of a trophy, likely nabbed after the main event. The real fight was about something much bigger. For centuries, Italy was torn by a fierce rivalry between the Guelphs, who backed the Pope, and the Ghibellines, who supported the Holy Roman Emperor. Bologna was a staunchly Guelph city, while Modena was proudly Ghibelline. This bucket business was just the final insult after years of border disputes and political backstabbing, the real trigger being Modena's capture of the Bolognese castle of Montevideo. So, in November 1325, Bologna had enough. They marched on Modena with a massive army of about 32,000 men. Waiting for them was the Ghibelline commander, Rinaldo Passerino Bonacolsi, with a much smaller but more experienced force of only 7,000. At the Battle of Zappolino, the only major clash of the war, the Modenese, outnumbered, delivered a shocking and decisive victory, routing the larger Bolognese army in a matter of hours and chasing them back to their own city walls. As a humorous final act of medieval trolling, the victorious Modenese soldiers held a mocking festival right outside Bologna's city gates, and to add insult to injury, swiped an Oaken Bucket from a well as a trophy. And that bucket, it was never returned. A copy is still proudly displayed in Modena's Torre della Ghirlandina to this day, a nearly 700-year-old symbol of a victory in a very peculiar war. Sir Chuckleton. Lesson! The War of the Bucket in 1325 reminds us that spectacular conflicts are rarely about the trivial things they're named for. The bucket was a symbol, not the cause. It shows that when deep-seated political and ideological tensions are already at a boiling point, any small provocation, a stolen castle, a petty insult, or even a humble wooden bucket can become the spark that ignites a full-blown war.
Ah, the dance floor. A place of joy, questionable moves, and maybe, just maybe, dancing yourself to death. History pros, today we're waltzing the Strasbourg, Holy Roman Empire, in the summer of 1818 for a bizarre and terrifying event known as the Dancing Plague. It all started in July 1518 with one woman, a Frau Trophaea. She stepped into the street and began to dance. And she didn't stop. For nearly a week, she danced without rest. Within days, dozens of others joined her, seemingly unable to control their own bodies. The mania spread like wildfire. By August, the dancing plague had gripped over 400 people. Now, you might think the city authorities would, tell them to stop. Instead, they made a fatal miscalculation. Based on the medical wisdom of the day, they believed the dancers were suffering from hot blood, and the only cure was to dance it out. So they cleared open-air markets, erected a stage, and even hired professional musicians to keep the beat going. This, of course, only encouraged more people to join the frantic non-stop dance. The result was a human catastrophe. The continuous, exhausting movement in the summer heat led to heart attacks, strokes, and sheer exhaustion. Contemporary accounts report that at its peak, the plague killed up to 15 people per day. The authorities, realizing their public dance party idea was a disaster, eventually banned all music and dancing.
They rounded up the remaining dancers and took them to a shrine to pray for forgiveness and a cure. So what on earth was going on? For a long time, historians suspected ergotism, a type of poisoning from a fungi that grows on damp rye bread. It can cause violent muscle spasms, but that doesn't explain the coordinated dance-like movements. The more accepted theory today is mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria. The people of Strasbourg in 1518 were under extreme stress. Famine, poverty, and rampant diseases like syphilis and leprosy were devastating the region. In a deeply superstitious culture, this collective despair likely erupted into a trance-like state, a psychological contagion spreading through a terrified populace. Sir Chuckleton, lesson, the dancing plague of 1518 is a chilling reminder of the powerful connection between mind and body. It demonstrates that when a community is saturated with extreme stress and fear, its collective psychological state can manifest in bizarre and even deadly physical ways, proving that sometimes the most dangerous contagions are not viruses, but ideas.
Huzzah, pros! Tell me, what's the most formidable enemy a nation has ever faced? A rival empire? A revolutionary ideology? Well, hold my pint, because in 1932, the Commonwealth of Australia, armed with machine guns, declared war on big flightless birds. Welcome to the Great Emu War. Yes, you read that right. In the post-World War I years, Australia settled many veteran soldiers on marginal farmland in Western Australia. Then, the Great Depression hit.
To make matters worse, in late 1932, a population of some 20,000 emus in their annual migration decided these new wheat farms were a fantastic all-you-can-eat buffet. The desperate farmers, many of them decorated veterans themselves, appealed to the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce. So, in an astonishing display of military problem-solving, the government dispatched a small contingent of the Royal Australian Artillery. Armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, Major G.P.W. Meredith led the charge in what was officially dubbed the Emu War. The plan was simple: herd the emus into range and open fire. The reality? Utterly comical failure. The emus, it turned out, were tactical geniuses. They refused to bunch up, scattering in all directions when fired upon. They were surprisingly fast and absorbed bullets like feathery tanks. On the first day of major engagement, after firing hundreds of rounds, the official kill count was maybe a dozen birds.
Major Meredith was quoted as saying, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." A second attempt was made later in November, which was slightly more successful, but the numbers were still abysmal. After firing nearly 10,000 rounds over a month, the official reports claimed fewer than 1,000 emus killed. The press had a field day. The public ridiculed the operation, and a conservationist in Parliament asked if a medal would be awarded to the emus for winning the war. The military was quietly withdrawn in December. Sir Chuckleton, lesson, the Great Emu War of 1932 is a spectacular lesson in asymmetric problem solving. It shows that applying a conventional, brute force solution, in this case military might, to an unconventional problem of nature and economics is often doomed to expensive, embarrassing failure. Sometimes you don't need a bigger gun, you need a better fence.
Greetings, history pros! What's the weirdest thing you've ever been stuck in? Bad traffic? A boring meeting? Cute. How about a 25-foot-high, 35-mile-per-hour tidal wave of molasses? Grab a spoon as we head to Boston's North End on January 15th, 1919 for the Great Molasses Flood. It was an unseasonably warm winter day. Suddenly, a massive storage tank, over 50 feet tall and holding more than 2.3 million gallons of molasses, catastrophically failed. The tank belonged to the Purity Distilling Company, which used the molasses to produce industrial alcohol for munitions. Witnesses reported a deep, rumbling sound, like machine gun fire, as the steel rivets shot out of the tank. Then, a colossal, sticky wave erupted, moving with enough force to tear buildings from their foundations, crush freight cars, and sweep horses and people into its gooey embrace. The disaster was not an act of God. It was a failure of corporate responsibility. The tank had been rushed into service in 1915, built shoddily and never properly tested for leaks. In fact, it leaked so badly that local children would bring cups to collect the sweet drippings. The company simply painted the tank brown to hide the evidence. For years, residents had heard the tank groaning and creaking, but their warnings were ignored. The warm spell on January 15th likely caused the fermenting molasses to expand, providing the final, fatal pressure on the already strained tank walls.
The aftermath was horrific. Rescue workers waded through waist-deep, viscous goo for days trying to find survivors. The sheer stickiness of the molasses made every movement a struggle and hampered rescue efforts. In the end, 21 people were killed and around 150 were injured. The cleanup was immense. The city used salt water from fireboats to wash the molasses into the harbor, which remained brown for months. Bostonians claimed they could still smell the sweet, sickly scent of molasses on hot summer days for decades afterward. The Great Molasses Flood became one of the first major class action lawsuits in Massachusetts history. Sir Chuckleton. Lesson. Boston's Great Molasses Flood of 1919 serves a sticky but powerful lesson on corporate negligence. It shows that ignoring safety warnings and prioritizing profit over sound engineering is a recipe for catastrophe. The true cost of cutting corners is never just financial. It's measured in human lives and the painful, slow process of cleanup and reform.
Ah, the humble prank. These days, it's a cringy TikTok or a jump scare on YouTube. But oh, my dear pros, let me take you back to a time of analog artistry and chaos. We're off to 54 Berners Street, London on November 27, 1810, for the day one man, with just a pen and paper, brought the city to its knees. This is the Berners Street hoax. The mastermind was Theodore Hook, a notorious wit and prankster. He made a bet with his friend Samuel Beasley that in 1 week he could make any house in London the most famous address in the entire city. His target? The unsuspecting Mrs. Tottenham at 54 Berners Street. From a rented room across the street, Hook and his friends spent days writing thousands of letters, all requesting deliveries, services, and official visits to Mrs. Tottenham's house for that single November day. The deluge began at the crack of dawn. First, a dozen chimney sweeps arrived. Then came the coal deliveries, cart after cart. They were followed by cake makers, upholsterers, piano deliveries, fishmongers, and doctors. Hook had ordered everything imaginable from every corner of the city. He even sent dentists to pull the servants' teeth and undertakers with coffins. But Hook didn't stop at tradespeople. He aimed for the top.
He sent summons to the governor of the Bank of England, the chairman of the East India Company, the Lord Mayor of London, a cabinet minister, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and even the Duke of York, the commander-in-chief of the British Army. As dozens of these dignitaries and hundreds of tradesmen converged on the single, modest house, the streets of London's West End ground to a complete and utter halt. The chaos was legendary. Fights broke out between angry merchants demanding payment. Carriages were locked in a citywide traffic jam. The police were overwhelmed. And through it all, Theodore Hook watched from his window, laughing hysterically. He won his bet, of course. Despite the massive disruption and the efforts of the Bow Street runners to find the culprit, Hook simply slipped away to the countryside and was never formally charged for the incident. Lesson: the Berners Street hoax of 1810 is a masterclass in exploiting the invisible infrastructure of a city. Trust, commerce, government, and daily life all run on the assumption that a request for service is legitimate. Hook demonstrated that by weaponizing this trust, a single malicious actor could turn the very systems that make a city function into instruments of pure, unadulterated chaos.
Hello, pros! Have you ever left an anonymous thank you note? Maybe paid for the coffee of the person behind you? Noble gestures indeed. But can you keep a secret tradition alive for 60 years? Let's travel to Westminster Hall and Burying Ground in Baltimore, Maryland, from roughly 1949 to 2009 to witness one of history's most elegant and enduring mysteries, the Poe toaster. For 6 decades, in the cold, dark hours of January 19th, Edgar Allan Poe's birthday, a mysterious figure would appear, dressed in black, with a wide-brimmed hat and a white scarf concealing their face. This individual would walk to Poe's original grave marker. There, they would raise a toast with a glass of Martell cognac, leave the half-empty bottle, and place 3 red roses in a distinctive arrangement. Then, as silently as they arrived, they would vanish into the night. This wasn't just a one-off tribute, it was a precise annual ritual. The identity of the Poe toaster was a complete mystery. For decades, the only witnesses were a few groundskeepers. But by the 1980s, word had spread. Small crowds of onlookers, along with the curator of the Baltimore Poe House, Jeff Jerome, would gather to watch from a distance, respecting the solemnity of the moment. The toaster never acknowledged them, simply performing the ritual and disappearing. Over the years, the toaster occasionally left cryptic notes.
One in 1993 suggested a torch was being passed, reading, "The torch will be passed." Another in 1999 stated the original toaster had died and the tradition was now being carried on by a son. This second-generation toaster continued the ritual faithfully until 2009, which would be the final confirmed appearance. In 2010, the Poe toaster failed to appear, and the 60-year tradition came to an unceremonious end, the secret of the toaster's identity seemingly gone for good. Sir Checkleton, lesson. The 60-year vigil of the Poe toaster is a profound statement on the nature of legacy. In an age demanding recognition and celebrity, this anonymous, multi-generational act of devotion reminds us that the most powerful tributes are not about the person giving them. True legacy is a quiet, consistent act of remembrance, its value measured not in fame, but in unwavering fidelity to a memory.
Hello, pros! Ever worked on a project that was too big to fail? A product launch so hyped it just had to be perfect? Well, let me introduce you to the poster child for epic fails. We're sailing to Stockholm, Sweden on August 10th, 1628 for the maiden voyage of the warship Vasa, which also happened to be its final voyage. The Vasa was supposed to be the ultimate flex. King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, a major player in the 30 Years' War, wanted the most powerful, most fearsome warship on the planet. This wasn't just a boat, it was a floating statement of national power, lavishly decorated with hundreds of colorful, gilded sculptures depicting Swedish history and royal might. On that fateful August day, thousands of spectators, including foreign ambassadors, lined the shores of Stockholm Harbor. The magnificent Vasa set sail, its cannons firing a thunderous salute. It sailed for about 1,300 meters, less than a mile. Then a light gust of wind hit, the ship listed heavily to its port side. It righted itself for a moment, but a second gust hit, and this time the great ship leaned so far over that water poured into the open lower gun ports. In minutes, in front of the horrified crowd, the pride of the Swedish Navy sank to the bottom of the harbor, taking around 30 people with it. So, what went wrong? This wasn't a freak storm. It was a catastrophic design flaw. The king himself was partly to blame.
He had personally approved the ship's dimensions, but then ordered a second, heavier dun deck to be added after construction had begun, wanting to cram a staggering 64 bronze cannons onto the vessel. The ship's master shipwright, Henrik Hybertson, died a year before the ship was completed, leaving the project in less experienced hands. Crucially, the Vasa was dangerously top-heavy. There simply wasn't enough room in its narrow hull for the proper amount of stone ballast needed to counteract the weight of the upper decks and the heavy artillery. A stability test was performed before the voyage, where 30 sailors ran back and forth across the deck. The ship rocked so violently that the admiral in charge, Class Fleming, stopped the test, fearing the ship would capsize right there in the dock. Incredibly, they decided to launch it anyway. The ship lay preserved in the cold, brackish water of the Baltic Sea for 333 years until it was rediscovered by marine archaeologist Anders Franzén. In a monumental feat of engineering, the almost perfectly intact hull was raised to the surface in 1961. Today, the restored Vasa is a world-famous museum, offering an unparalleled glimpse into 17th century naval life and one of history's greatest blunders.
Sir Chuckleton. Lesson. The Vasa's maiden voyage in 1628 teaches a stark lesson in project management.
When the ambitious demands of a client, even a king, contradict the laws of physics and the warnings of experts, reality doesn't compromise. The project will sink, sometimes literally, under the weight of its own unmanaged expectations.